So, can you give some of your background, how you kind of got into this idea? I don't know, politics, constitutional stuff.
25-year Navy career, and I was looking forward to that. I grew up in a Navy family, and I graduated did the last 5 years of living in a Navy family in Norfolk, Virginia,
Right. Oh,
doing Virginia history and all that. I got a pretty good dose of Constitution and the beginning of America and the Civil War, and all that sort of stuff. And I chose to take leadership type positions, whether it was in high school or in my going into the Navy as an officer. I was a naval aviator, did that for many years, and then went into the industrial end, the maintenance, life cycle logistics portion of it, and really had to start working for a living doing that. But in doing so, I actually took Dr. W. Edwards Deming's roadshow seminar for college credits and found him fascinating.
hmm,
Very difficult because what he taught was not something that America bought all of there during the Japanese invasion of our industries. At the same time, I read a lot of Peter Drucker and some of those other management gurus while I was on active duty because I eventually got command of a large industrial activity repairing aviation material. And I applied that sort of stuff to making the performance better in those organizations
right.
and had enormous success. So, fast forward to when things really started unraveling, and that's debatable whether it was, you saw it back happening back in the mid 90s. I sensed, but then for sure after Citizens United, and then ultimately with the first Trump administration, I just felt compelled to have to try and I reached back into my history of what worked, and it centered around purpose. You asked in the preliminary to this, be ready to talk about some issues, and the issues are always going to be there, and there's going to be thousands of them. But where I found the greatest success is not in the issues, but it was in the process. And when I write about the Constitution, it took a few years after I started writing, and probably 2017, during that first Trump, I made some wrong assumptions. I thought the purpose of the Constitution or the purpose of America, and I always think of those as being one and the same. The Constitution is America. It is the rule of law, and we the people are America. But I thought the purpose initially was to improve, taking the Deming thing of constant improvement, to improve capitalism and democracy. Those were our strong suits. That's what we did really, really well. And that was a red herring. I'd always believed that. And I felt we were doing democracy very insufficiently and we were doing capitalism wrong, uh,
Right.
incompletely. But as I kept writing and reading other people, I convinced myself that there had to be a greater purpose. And that's when I kind of stumbled on the religious end of it. And I'm not a religious person. I haven't actively attended church in a long, long time. But that's why it took me so long to get onto Substack with even my first essay. I wanted that first essay to express the breadth of what I felt was a way forward, a way out of this mess. And it came in one essay, but that essay is really two parts. And I think the first part is talking about the historical aspect of the Constitution, and it was talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how the Constitution was really a good vehicle to help us meet that hierarchy of needs. The second part really is the thing where I say, okay, if I'm going to get a critical mass, a bigger, and we'll just stick with the critical mass, enough people to really move a philosophy or purpose forward, let's bring in this humanitarian aspect from a religious thing. And that's where I came up with the concept of the Constitution. Really, I could see within it the processes that you would use to exercise the golden rule and so
Right.
forth.
Yeah, it seems to be a double-edged sword because connecting it to just religion in general, the Bible, it seems like there's going to get a lot of pushback by amount of people just because of ideas of separation and state, and people are going to knee jerk that, hey, this is, this is not really what part of the United States is really about. And so it seems like there's the humanitarian golden rule, more general religious aspect, but then there's the kind of the nuts and bolts that I think a lot of people lose their mind. What do you think about that?
You're absolutely right. And in my writing, and the reason there's not a second essay, I mean, I probably have a book's worth written, but I'm being very cautious here, hoping I have enough time left in my life. I'm 78 years old now, and I'm not an author, I'm not really a writer, but I've really passionately enjoyed the discovery aspect of this and the potential of taking it forward. Part of my passion comes from when I started implementing Dr. Deming's productivity improvement, modern methods of management, and the Drucker stuff.
Yeah.
And I'd also gotten some special instruction on, I'll call it democracy light, using techniques like the nominative group technique to get consensus building. From a leadership standpoint, the results that I saw were so phenomenal, and my work as a leader was so much easier when the purpose was so clearly identified to the team that they, every day that they came to work, they knew exactly what the purpose of their work was. Finally, their enthusiasm just ratcheted up, and their self-direction just became a phenomenon. So I realize that what I'm writing about is for naught if it cannot get picked up by a leader, because it has to be led from the top. In my organization, I was the boss. Now, I almost had to, in fact, I did. I had to hide much of what I was doing from people further up the chain of command, or else they would have shut me down
Yeah.
because I was doing things that were so non-military. It was it would at the time during the Cold War would have been embarrassing. No, that's not the way we do. We don't have democratic voices, determining how we improve performance and things like that. So, but as far as the church, back to the church and state thing, that's a real issue in the religious leaders, at least that I have talked to. We haven't back and forth too terribly much on it, but it's a place that they're not willing to go to right now just because of that. Where I come from is just like in my military thing when I introduced Deming and all these other management gurus and trying to modernize the way we do our business. I fundamentally, clearly believe that we need to fundamentally change the way we look at government. What our founders did in creating, and I use the word create, I use the word invent, because that's a modern way of looking at what they did 250 years ago. When they invented the Constitution, they radically changed the way common man looked at government because common man gained voice. Now, 250 years ago, they didn't gain near the voice that we've gained in the 250 years since, with women voting and the freeing of the slaves and and everybody supposedly having an equal voice. So I'm saying that we have evolved. If you look at the Constitution as a process for building better living or building better people, I don't care which you choose, both of them are moving the ball forward. If we don't start looking at government as being something other than the way we've always looked at it, we're not going to make the breakthrough. So I bring religion into it, and I'm prepared to equally bring the press into it, because those two things, the press and the religious leadership, are the two things that our Constitution did better than any other form of government prior to our Constitution.
Yeah, it's
So,
funny. Well, number one, I talk a lot about a broken system on the radical independent and a lot of processes and whatnot that are we need to, I get into election reform and all that stuff. And talking about Deming, one of his quotes that I piggyback on a lot: a bad system will beat a good person every time, or something like that. I'm kind of paraphrasing.
the system is crucial.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's something that I use quite often. That kind of rhetoric, talking about our broken political system. And it's also interesting, I just throw this out there, professional development things that I've done. I did a 3 week thing in LA some years ago, and it was kind of a constitutional boot camp, and it went deep and it was pretty insane. But you know where we started? Deuteronomy, or I can't even say it right. Deuteronomy. Well, we didn't start there. We actually started with Aristotle and we talked about Cicero a lot. But the point is, we went back far, and there was a religious component when you talk about Western thought and order. If you go to visit the Supreme Court and you go inside, and they have all these like little statue designs all along the top and on the inside, they got a lot of lawgivers. Moses is there. I think even I'm not a real religious person, but the guy who basically created Islam, right?
Yeah.
They have religious figures in there, not because of their religiosity, but because of them as being lawgivers and creating order and structure and stuff like that, which is part of that Western evolution of thought. It can't be dismissed. It's there, right? And it does play a role. So I just think that's interesting in terms of kind of how you're looking at it too.
And that's when I went on this thing. And so I started the subject of truth. And just to put it to bed, there's probably nothing more important in life, is kind of my conclusion, than truth. And some of the management gurus, Stephen Covey, I think, is glue is trust is the glue of life.
Mm,
And that's whether you're in business and government and your personal relationship and marriages, truth, because truth is what, if you're a science denier and you're trying to gain more and more and higher levels of truth, then you're an anti-truther. So we realize how difficult that is right now. So truth is a big thing. And then from there, I discovered personally, and I'm not the first to discover it, and I know that our system of government is nothing. The process of the Constitution, the separation of powers, the checks and balances, the whole process, any manufacturing process, is nothing without truth. I mean, it's just air.
right.
It's of no value. So truth, and Deming would agree, and it was one of the things that he put forth. He says there is nothing more valuable than truth, because just by default,
Yeah.
because the opposite is worthless. So truth was something that I wrote about, and of course, democracy and capitalism. That's what brought me to the constancy of purpose, which was a
Yeah.
Deming and many others. So
The truth aspect is enormous. I
yes,
mean, people say we live in a post-truth world, alternate facts. There's always a lot of distortions in society that take us farther from the truth, and we're seeing so much of it now. The emotional tribalism, the toxic dysfunction. It's extremely distorting, and I just think it's a huge problem. It is really one of the fundamental issues we're trying to deal with, I think, now.
that's where I come from. And all this is, we have humongous agreement in the problem of lack of truth and alternative truths. As far as what the problems are, we talk about them very thoroughly and very well. And even if we're polarized on it, those are being talked about very thoroughly. My purpose is to take us beyond that. Okay, we know the
Right.
problems.
Right.
What is the of purpose?
Yeah.
And we don't have to agree on that. I'm proposing a constancy of purpose in that essay. And by the way, that essay, it is there because it really is a summary statement of probably 20 essays that I have behind it, or many more chapters to a book that would try and better solidify that constancy of purpose, that our purpose of our government, we need to move beyond our understanding of government as far as controlling people and controlling society and all that. If it does that, what is the purpose? If it's not, if it's to get richer, that's one thing. Let's have that argument. If it's to build better, bigger government or smaller government, we'll have that argument. I maintain the purpose, whether you're at work, at play, raising a family, running a business, in the military, whatever you're you're doing 24/7, it's to build better people. And if you could coalesce around that, if you could have say that that was the political party, it's to build better people. Well, back when I was your age, we had two political moderates, and one may have been a little bit more pro business, the other one may be more poor pro people or civil rights. We're not having that discussion anymore. The parties have chased out the moderates, and now it's extremism on both ends, and that is the major problem.
Right.
Uh, we need to somehow get leadership is duking out that constancy of purpose. All we're working on right now that I can see are polarizing issues, and
Right.
we're just trying to
Right.
make one party or the other, and that is the problem. It's
It seems as though for the constancy of purpose to gain any traction, that's an aspect or maybe something that can help get us in the right direction. But for it to really have an effect, I do feel like we need to change a lot. We need to change how we think about and do politics. We need those election reforms that will tone down the extremism and tone down the polarization. We need all these things to kind of happen for ideas and concepts like a constancy of purpose to really get teeth and dig in. We're just so dysfunctional now. I don't want to be negative, but
right.
I feel
And,
like you put it out and it's like it doesn't go hardly anywhere because we're so broken. So it might help us kind of get us in that direction, but I think there's so much more we got to do for something like that to really have an effect. What do you think about that?
and Chris, you're absolutely right, and that's why I'm being very careful about how I build my Substack. I put out it's not fair to call it a manifesto. I wanted to cover the territory that backed up what I think ought to be our constancy of purpose. But the problem is that you just described it. We can't. That's not going to go anywhere in today's political environment because the system is it's more than broken. It's kaput. Until we get election reform in, and that's why I was working with Veterans for All Voters.
Yeah, yeah,
Is
I'm
in
familiar.
doing my writing, and it goes again back to Deming. He says, okay,
Mhm.
you can't solve 1,000 problems; they're not of equal value. So if you had one, two, or three things that were more important than anything else to break this logjam that we're in, so that you could get back to where we were during the Cold War, when we actually had a whether it may not have been written, but it was understood what our constancy of purpose was, and
Right.
that was to support and defend the Constitution,
Yeah.
whether you were civilian or in the military, because the alternative was them,
And that
and
worked because yeah, that
it
and that
did.
worked back then
It
because the system was somewhat functional. It wasn't perfect. Two-party system has
functional,
its
but
flaws, but it was functional enough to for something like that to survive, thrive.
it was functional because it had a constancy of purpose. When you lose that constancy of purpose, then there's no need. The system that is ideally suited with, a system based on truth and trust and all the things a good organization needs to be valid and supported by all the stakeholders. Once we won the Cold War, we don't have to worry about communism. We won that war. We're out of the Cold War. Okay, what's the next agenda? Fixing the system is what has to be done, and there is no political will in the two major parties. That's why we're talking. Is I respect you as an independent, and I maintain that whether you claim a political party or not, if you can't see yourself as an independent thinker, that's something that we have to overcome. And our
Mm.
politicians aren't going to do that. And
Right.
we found out that the very little left press that's going to do that. Because even if you take the absolute best newspapers, journalists, whatever outlet you want to choose, and you have label as the most independent minded, the headlines will still be in the first paragraph will be the Democrats need to do this, the Republicans need to do that. No, it's People need to do it. People need to do it,
Right.
not parties. The
Yeah. The
Constitution was not written for parties.
Right. The duopoly has just ingrained itself in our consciousness in every aspect of society, and partisan politics has infiltrated every aspect of our society. That's our frame. That's how we see everything now. And that's such a huge problem.
My lifetime, it has exacerbated itself. In my writing, what I want to see behind that initial essay that I put out there is more of the essays that I've got that are talking about the need. Everybody's their own agent.
Yeah.
But if you can be your own agent and realize that your agency to be the best you can be, which is inherent in your DNA, is the same as your neighbors and every neighbor around the planet. We are at a point in time where we're finally smart enough to realize that the whole world can have the same constancy of purpose, but it requires getting that critical mass built. And America is where that critical mass should have started, but we've lagged behind,
We've
and as
stalled.
far as I'm concerned, yeah, I think, and I'm not sure that we're going to come out of it, at least in my lifetime, because I've written some. I'm not ready to put it out there until I get some other stuff, but I've got a good one written on how we should be actually mourning the loss of America. I mean, it's already dead, and we're in denial.
Hmm.
You talk about the Kubler-Ross stages of grief. After we talk, read them, all the stages of grief, and you'll find our denial. We're denying that the death has occurred. We're arguing and we're finding excuses and we're bargaining. We haven't accepted it, and we need to accept that we are just sinking lower and lower. We're not really winning the battle. We haven't been.